All right, so we'll get into our next batch of slide decks here and final video lecture for the course as we wrap things up in the last couple of chapters and slides here. These really funnel into chapters 13, 14, and then we'll be skipping ahead to 18 here because I think it's a little bit more applicable and one of my favorite ones to really talk through and work through and is more I think, important and pertinent to each of your careers going forward as well. So it's just kind of the application of leadership. Chapters 13 and 14 help us dive into some of the diversity aspects and issues within leadership, as well as some of the opportunities and how things have been handled and history of it as well in sport. So chapter 13 here, the first one, addressing the gender gap in sport. Historically, we've seen an evolution, really, of women and their involvement in sport, from sidelines to fans to being integrated into the leadership aspect to women's sport leagues and development throughout the course of history. We've seen a lot since the Civil War, obviously, when we were forming as a lot of the professional sport leagues soon after the Civil War finished up was the very, very, very early iterations of some of the games that we now have. Baseball, for example, in the late 1800s. So we started to see some of that, and simultaneously, there's some demand for women to participate in physical education and sport. There were pockets of opportunities then, but it didn't really come about until later on, certainly in the 1900s. Now, roughly 100 years ago or so, when things really started to get a push. And I would say also, certainly after World War II, is when we saw a bigger boom of not just the sport phenomenon, but also opportunities and push for women to get involved in sport as well. So what we saw over time is that female physical educators organize opportunities for women to participate. So a lot of schools and a lot of programs or organizations didn't have specific opportunities for women, and women were not allowed to participate in the men's or the boys' leagues at that time either, and so they had to form their own. Unlike men's sports, women's did not have and did not receive that financial support, and we saw that especially at the college level. We'll get to Title IX here in a couple of slides as well, and some of those things. But also the first women's intercollegiate athletic competition took place when Cinda Berenson, who was a physical education teacher at Smith College, organized and adapted the rules of basketball for women. So that kind of was the launching point for opportunities for women in intercollegiate athletics. Opportunities continued to expand, and we saw some of those divides. The philosophical divide was really kind of the notion in society that for a long time centered around that sport and physical activity is dangerous for women. They shouldn't, and we can't risk them participating in sport and physical activity. They could get hurt, which would put their ability to bear children and take care of the home at great risk. And nowadays, obviously that kind of sounds silly or ridiculous compared to what we see women athletes do on a routine basis. The U.S. women's national soccer team, Serena Williams, to name a couple of them. So again, we know now more than what we had in decades and generations past, but that societal notion or philosophical divide was really ingrained for a while in society. Now, part of the current or more modern aspect that we see of women in leadership in sport and opportunities for participation in sport revolved around the AIAW, Association for Intercollegiate Athletics for Women, and the NCAA. And the reason why I mention this is because the AIAW played a huge role in the passing of and formation of Title IX. Now, Title IX, we're probably familiar with it. It's the 50-year anniversary of it this year. And it's defined as no person in the U.S. shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any educational programs or activities receiving federal financial assistance. If we pull a person off the street who doesn't have a sport management background, or maybe even if we pull some people who do, and ask them Title IX to define it, vast majority of the time, 9 times out of 10, and maybe 10 out of 10, we'll probably get somebody who has the word sport or college athletics or something to that effect in their version of the definition. Yet that's not the case. Sport doesn't appear in that definition, neither does athletics. But why and how Title IX has been applied to college sport is because of that federal financial assistance and educational programs. And Title IX used to be, when it was first incepted in 1972, that it was program specific. At least that was the original argument. And there are a couple of court cases that swayed it back and forth that no, it should be university, or went from being university or institution organizational to then being program specific. And then there's a foundational case in the 80s, which then flipped it back to no, this is now an institution. So any institution that receives the federal financial assistance. And this was key. So the back and forth. So it went from, Title IX went from institution-based to program-based to institution-based again, as it is currently. Because so few athletic departments and athletic programs or sport programs, physical education programs, receive any financial assistance. Athletic departments certainly don't receive it directly. A lot of their funding comes from the institution, fundraising, the NCAA, or their conference, along with whatever they can raise on their own. So, with any program, so it could be a music program, could be whatever the case is, now that blanketed approach helped to cover intercollegiate athletics. And this helps spur on greater opportunities for participation for women in sport at the college level, as well as any federally financed through assistance programs at the interscholastic level as well. So in high school, we've seen more girls play in high school sports than ever before. However, at the coaching and athletic director or other leadership positions, men still dominate this. Part of it is, and we kind of have two forces at play here, is historically sport opportunities were designed for and programmed for men. And so one of the requisites of being a coach is playing experience or familiarity and experience with that sport. Well, the easiest way to do that is to play the sport. So if we only have a pool of one demographic to pull from for those positions, then that's going to make it more difficult to integrate other people. As more and more opportunities for women came along, we started to see more women get into coaching, but the growth of participation opportunities, essentially teams, just grew faster than what we could supply women in the coaching experience and coaching levels and leadership positions to an extent as well. So we've seen these two forces at play to now there's actually more men coaching women's teams than women coaching women's teams. And compared to when Title IX was passed, we actually have fewer women coaching women's teams than back in 1972. So this slide here just kind of puts that into terms and breaks down some of the percentages here. And so we see the athletic directors percentage as of 2012, so a little outdated. But again, we don't see a vast majority of women leaders at that level. Professional sport, and so one thing, it's the TIDES report, is this professional sport report and report card that comes from University of Central Florida's sport business program there. And every year they go through all the major leagues, NCAA, and league offices, teams, and they essentially have a ranking system and metrics and everything that they've verified scientifically, and they're able to calculate grades for hiring practices across not just gender, but racial diversity as well, and it breaks things down. So one thing to consider, now I've got some older data here in 2010 to 2012, but some things to kind of think on, and you can do a simple search for the TIDES report, is to see how these grades have changed since. The NBA and WNBA, they continue to be leaders among the organizations that are graded out because of their policies, because of how they have their hiring practices set up, as well as their training and development of talent, of former players becoming coaches and becoming administrators and managers as well. So why are there so few women in sport leadership positions? Part of it is stereotypes. Again, that long-held belief that women couldn't and shouldn't be involved in sport. It was dangerous. Certainly, there's still pockets of some of that, as well as some of the stereotype or structural forces that we've seen some of the aspects where, because it's been so male-dominated for so long, that when people think of, oh, there's going to be a hiring for an athletic director, people automatically assume it's going to be a guy, a man. And so they have to overcome that. Personal characteristics, again, some of that's influenced or overshadowed by stereotypes and those forces, as well as some of the notions that folks have that disregard women's ambitions. Why would a woman want to move up and become an athletic director anyways? She should be content in the marketing department. Well, we're moving past that. We're seeing the capability and drive that women have to continue to achieve and earn sport leadership positions higher up. Athletic directors, general managers, team owners, etc., coaches. So we know that these are forces that they're overcoming. There's also double jeopardy, which are challenges for women of color in sport. So we both have the race and the gender aspect here. And so they're kind of struck by both sexism and racism potentially in sport. So they have to overcome double the forces in those positions as well. Part of those forces, I usually describe it as depicting them, is the glass ceiling and the glass cliff. Glass ceiling, if we're not familiar with it, it's the proverbial ceiling women face and how high they can climb in an organization's hierarchy. Usually that ceiling is somewhere mid-level. Essentially, it's holding them from the C-suite. So, CEO, CFO, CMO, COO, any of those types of positions. Or in sport, holding them back from breaking through to the general manager, athletic director, team owner, that kind of positions. So it might look a little different for each organization, but that glass ceiling's just, again, it's harder and harder until we get more and more who break through it and kind of dispel some of those notions and stereotypes. That glass ceiling is that notion that we see. We've certainly seen women break through it, especially in recent years. Kim Eng is now general manager for the Miami Marlins. We also see more and more women getting into coaching. Becky Hammond really blazing the trail with her experience through the NBA and now portraying that into a prominent role in the WNBA and coaching there. However, it's not always good enough to just break through the ceiling. Sometimes they run into the glass cliff. And this is what happens when a woman finally does break through that ceiling, begins to lead an organization. However, she's essentially put there to lead an organization that everybody else knows in the hiring process that, hey, things are about to get turned bad. There's a crisis that's coming up. One of the crises that we've talked about, earlier in the class. There's a scandal. Something's going on. Things are about to hit the fan. And so they look at it as, well, we can finally put a woman in charge because either she might be able to actually clean up this mess. Or B, where the glass cliff comes into play is, oh, see, look what happens. Look at all this negative stuff that's happening. This is what we get for putting a woman in charge. She then loses that position, takes and is hung with the blame for the issues, and slides back down the glass cliff below the glass ceiling level she just broke through. So again, that's kind of the two pressures there. It's not just enough to break through the ceiling, but we have to avoid the glass cliff. Some of that has to do with organizational culture, malintent of other people in an organization, as well as those that just simply don't want to see a woman achieve anything at that level. We do have several notable leaders in sport, and this is just a small list, but just some that we can, historic figures as well as some recent ones. I mentioned Kim Ng, Megan Rapinoe, Megan Chaika, who is heavily involved with hockey now, and she actually is founder and CEO of Stathletes, which is a hockey analytics company. She works with numerous teams, her organization, numerous teams. If we do have any other hockey fans in the class, you might have watched the NHL draft recently. She was right there on ESPN with their other panelists as well, walking through and talking through the prospects as they're getting picked and running some of the stats in that as well. Some strategies to increase women in sport leadership. Get education in sport management and business-related area and continue that education process, being a lifelong learner. Get involved in networking activities, help build the network, get involved in those specific organizations and associations, ideally at the national level if they exist. If not, then certainly the regional level. Got to self-promote, as well as gain knowledge of the career paths, and then ideally get a mentor. And I'll harp on getting a mentor in general here, but it's certainly something that relates to all three slide decks here. A mentor is like a cheat code. Just a good mentor at least is like a cheat code, and very helpful for anybody who's working through this career path. All right, so that's chapter 13. If you need a break, now's a good time to pause as we get into chapter 14. Chapter 14, lingering issues in race and leadership. I'll go through some of these slides here. Some of the key barriers and aspects are going to be very similar to what we just covered in Chapter 13 with women in sport leadership positions. So I'm not going to double down and rehash those since we just covered them. The historic factors and barriers and all that are very similar. Just some of the slight different nuances we'll see here, and that's what we'll highlight. So we should move through these ones pretty quick. We have a notion, the glass ceiling, glass cliff was the notion for women in leadership, but in sport as it pertains to race, we've got the black bottom pyramid. And this is essentially what boils down to people of color represented more at the bottom of the pyramid, that is sport or a sport organization, as athletes than in the top leadership roles. When we think about this, and if we take a minute or have looked through that Tides report on our own, we see that with the hiring practices across multiple leagues. The NFL, for example, there's a recent case with Brian Flores, and he brought up the case combating the Rooney Rule and the hiring practices of the NFL. Vast majority of players on an NFL roster are black, or some people of color. Yet the vast majority of head coaches, general managers, and other executives remain white. Those who go on to become assistant coaches, those black or other people of color, continue to have a hard time cracking the head coaching rank. So again, that's what we mean by this black bottom pyramid. We see that in college athletics as well. Underrepresentation, so what do we mean by this? Comparing number of people of color in leadership positions to U.S. Census demographic percentages. Again, that race and gender report card, that Tides report, helps break that down. Then there's also their representation as student athletes, and so we've got that on campuses and different reports within the NCAA as well. Unlike most industries, though, that use specific geographic locations to determine underutilization, usually we contend that a local or regional labor market is not appropriate when determining underrepresentation of people of color in sport leadership positions. So we define underrepresentation based on demographic comparisons between leadership and those playing positions. So that just puts into terms what we just explained with that pyramid aspect here. Historically, again, just in the United States, we've certainly had slavery, we've certainly had issues with Native Americans, Chinese exploitation as well. So not the prettiest picture when it comes to history as far as integrating and general treatment towards others. We've certainly worked through some, and we see some of the historical influences and events that continue to influence how policies and things are shaped and reshaped. Currently, we have barriers to leadership, such as internal and external barriers. Constraints that still persist today to limit people of color's attainment. So again, very similar to the issues that we raised and the barriers that we raised with women. The stereotypes, the notions that were held, historically, decades ago, generations ago, that now we know aren't true. But when organizations were being formed back then, those were the presiding notions, those were the presiding thoughts. And so kind of unpacking some of those ingrained aspects now. So again, mention the stereotypes. One thing, in an example here, for the NFL realized years ago that they had a hiring issue with it and implemented the Rooney Rule. So the Rooney Rule just states that for a head coaching or front office position, you have to interview at least one racial minority candidate. In 2012, there was a report that sanctioned by the NFL found that coaches of color are not getting the second chances as head coaches, coordinators, or college head coaches, meaning that if you do achieve that head coach position and you get fired or let go, chances are you're not getting another chance as a head coach versus their white counterparts who continually get chance after chance. Some of the successful ones we see, Andy Reid from Philadelphia to Kansas City. Bill Belichick, who actually had previous coaching experiences before the New England Patriots, wasn't really successful then, but he, again, got those opportunities. Pete Carroll, same thing. He was actually head coach of the New England Patriots in the 90s before he went to the college ranks and then left there for the Seahawks. Again, struggled during the Patriots' time in that as well. In the NBA, mentioned previously, it's the most racially diverse league out there that we have for the major four, and certainly if we integrate the WNBA, we have that up there that overtakes it as well. So the NBA and WNBA are kind of the leading examples here, especially when it comes to leadership positions. So for leadership positions, we see more head coaches of color than white head coaches, at least in 2012. We continue to see more opportunities for players moving into coaching or administrative positions as well. The NCAA is another example of that black bottom pyramid. Again, majority, at least at the big drawing sport, which is college football or college basketball, vast majority of the team, student athletes, are made up of racial minorities, people of color. Yet those that are coaching them are not. So clearly there's some kind of gap, some kind of barrier at play there. Social justice efforts, again, mentioned the Rooney Rule. That was something that's come under fire recently, especially with the recent issues with Brian Flores and what he showed to light. Several other coaches in the past have felt as though they haven't gotten a true interview. They were just kind of brought in as a token interview to basically appease the rule. And so there's been some issues with that. And so there's ongoing talk and strategies about how to either refine the Rooney Rule or what to replace it with. Robinson Rule, very similar setup for the college side of things here. Now, women of color, again, that's that double jeopardy aspect here. We see women of color facing the two daunting issues, post-Title IX as females, and then as well currently as women of color. So hopefully we see some parallels between women and their struggles of attaining leadership positions as well as people of color and their issues of attaining leadership positions in sport as well. Some of those issues overlap, and there might be the case that some of the strategies to solve some of those problems will overlap one day as well. So for Chapter 14, if you need a break before we get into the final chapter here, now would be the time. All right, Chapter 18. This is one of my favorite chapters because I think this is where it comes at usually at the end of the semester, and we've seen some growth hopefully. I know for our class here, 5-week class, pretty intense. Throughout a 16-week long semester course, there's a little longevity to the ingrained development in that, so we might see a little bit more, but hopefully key aspects stick with us. This one, how do we actually apply this? What does this all mean? How can we actually use this besides checking the box saying that, hey, we got this course knocked out of the curriculum? Well, glad you asked. So part of it is building those leadership skills, and we've done some of that throughout the course, or at least we've got the knowledge base for it. How to seek out and where to seek out opportunities on campus, right in our own backyard. Then get into some of the nitty-gritty transitioning from college into those positions as well. So what do employers look for? And this is not just from the textbook, but the numerous industry connections that I have, and usually end up talking with them, throughout the years or throughout a year. What are you looking for? Who are you looking for when students are applying or people are applying in general? So combination here, according to the National Association of Colleges and Employers, these employers through the colleges in sport departments are looking for strong leadership skills pertaining to communication. Can you work well with others? Can you problem solve? And can you problem solve both by yourself as well as while working with others? Can you make decisions that require a lot of information that needs to be processed and made sense of? Can you make decisions quickly? And can you make the right decision? And ideally, work experience. Overall, one of my former contacts with the Memphis Grizzlies, she really kind of stated it, I think, succinctly, and there's some articles out there, in Forbes and some of the other posts that kind of entail it as well. But basically, students especially need to cultivate the soft skills, the communication, the how to write properly, communicate properly, work on the processes. Do you do your homework? Do you have a process for doing your homework? Because that's going to translate into, do you have a process for doing your work when you get hired? What does that look like? Can you talk to people and be likable? Can you run a meeting? Can you be an effective decision maker? All those things, the soft skills aspect there. And then Lindsay at the Grizzlies, she would always say, if somebody has those and has experience with that, and can portray that in an interview and portray that in a cover letter and resume, that opens the door for them. May not hire that person necessarily, but that certainly gets them usually to the final round, or at least advancing the round. She said, because then we look at it as an employer, we can then teach you the necessary hard skills that we might need you to learn specifically for our organization or for the department that you're hired in. Now, that's not to say you need to come in without any experience or without any knowledge foundation. She said that's where college degrees and previous experience certainly come from. But we just want to build those hard skills on top of it. But if you don't have the soft skills, you can't do those other things, then it's going to be real hard to get past the first round of interviews, as well as be real hard to advance in your career overall. So building leadership skills, some things that demonstrate leadership skills, as professors, you probably hear us harp on GPA a little bit, but it acts as a metric. It acts as a statistic that we can use to compare people. Not just us, but hiring folks as well. That's why it's important. Ideally, if you got a 3.0 or higher, I always say if you've got a 3.5 or higher, then you can put that on your resume. But basically, it's similar to batting average, or WAR, or ERA, or completion percentage, or QBR. Pick any stat from your favorite sport. That's what GPA is. High GPA shows that, okay, this person is driven, they're motivated, they do the work, they follow directions. If they're coming with a high recommendation letter, that means that they've communicated with their professor or with their internship supervisor or with their former boss. So they probably have those soft skills. And then you couple that with some extracurricular activities such as any sports, leading a club, volunteering, and anything along those lines there to fill in the resume, and really kind of marry the knowledge that you're learning through the classes with the experience. Because one or both, definitely both, if you have the opportunities. It might be a little stressful. Sometimes it might be running around a little crazy, depending on what the experience is or organization you're working at while going through school. I've certainly been there, holding down multiple jobs while going through school, and earning my MBA at the time. But at the same time, I thought it was rewarding because I was able to apply the things that I was learning in my managerial position as well as my coaching position as well at the time. Strengths Finders is a book. Hopefully we've heard of it. If not, then there's also the Strengths Finders leadership version of the book. I highly recommend that. That's usually, again, something that in the longer course we would work through. And that comes with a code to take an assessment through the Gallup poll, or excuse me, the Gallup organization, which they do Gallup polling and stuff like that, but they also help to publish the Strengths Finders books. And that assessment can be taken. It's a self-assessment. Then they give you a nice personalized plan to continue to develop and cultivate your top strengths. The leadership one phrases it all and puts it through the lens of the leadership aspects. I really like that one. Creating a leadership portfolio, something to go along with your other materials for applying for jobs. And that's basically just a compilation of work. Examples of projects that you've led, documents and outcomes of those. Anything that you can show that, hey, yes, I led this team and we achieved these goals, or I led this team, we had a crisis and we still made it through. Whatever the case is, those experiences in there. Spreadsheets, any document that makes it easy to read through and yet portrays just exactly what you've done. It makes you look good. It can also include an elevator pitch, maybe videos, depending on how we're applying to jobs or putting ourselves out there. I kind of chuckled actually just a couple months ago. I saw on Twitter somebody who was completing their PhD in a different discipline, but basically put their mini resume and a mini elevator pitch video on Twitter and pinned it to their feed on their profile, and started to tag on different universities or different folks that they knew at different universities that might be hiring to watch it and that. So, and based on some of the comments on that I was reading at the time, it certainly seemed as though that they were starting to get some hits or at least some interest there. So, some of those innovative things that nowadays, integrating technology into that is certainly welcome, and also shows that you're adaptable to new technology and innovation. Develop the 4 C's: critical thinking, communication, collaboration, creativity. If we think back, we kind of had either an explicit chapter or a topic within a chapter that's covered all of these. So foundational-wise, knowledge-wise, we should have some of that. If we haven't already, hopefully it added to it. And if not, then at least, hey, now we know what to hone in on, which is just as valuable as well. Leadership opportunities on campus. As graduate students, I won't harp on this nearly as much as I would at the undergraduate level. I haven't gone through the undergraduate degree process and everything. I imagine that you're pretty well versed in this, but just take this as a refresher, and maybe this can spark some ideas as well. Internships, if we haven't already, definitely worth a shot, and something that it can, again, kind of open the door. If it's something that is, fits into the degree program, or even if you do a little bit more of an informal internship, if you can afford it. I know, time-wise and money and everything else is always a factor there as well. But again, just anything that we can do basically to get some more experience. Just kind of goes through applying. Again, this would be something that's spent a little bit more time at the undergraduate level. However, if anybody does have any questions or seeks out some guidance, more than happy to walk through and chat a little bit more about this process or the hiring process and applying to jobs as well. Certainly happy to help. Last bit here is networking. And hopefully this is something that, again, is a little redundant for us, which would show that we've been networking and building a network for some time. If not, that's okay. I would just start as soon as you can, ideally now or in the fall, certainly. This helps, again, kind of goes with the mentoring aspect. It's a cheat code. I mean, networking and having people that you can tab or keep tabs on, and hey, maybe somebody's got an opening or somebody knows somebody else who has an opening. Your mentors can help connect and build that network. And the fun thing is, at some point when you realize, further down the road that your network now that seemed so daunting to build, or maybe was a little bit of took a little bit more effort, one day you realize that, hey, these are the people I converse with the most or keep tabs on the most. Maybe we got a text thread or email thread or whatever the case is, or see them at a conference, and we're no longer strangers. That's the power of networking there, besides opening up possibilities for jobs. I'm mentoring here. Again, highly, highly, highly recommend it. That would be the one soapbox that I would get on and continue to get on, and will always get on. A good mentor just means so much and is such a catalyst. If you don't have one already, certainly seek one out. If you don't know how to seek one out, I'm certainly happy to discuss how to do that, what that can look like, things to look for. Again, it's just insurmountable. It's a cheat code. It's walking in somebody's footsteps, but avoiding all the potholes that they hit in the road on their journey, because they're there to tell you that, hey, yeah, avoid this, avoid that, or go this route. It's a shortcut, or go this route. It can lead to these other opportunities, or meet so and so. That adds to your network. So again, mentor just. If you don't get anything else out of this class, please take away the notion to get a mentor. That would, at the very least, make me happy that you got that out of there. That, hey, or if you do have a mentor already, look to add another one, or look to cultivate a deeper relationship with your current mentor to really be a catalyst there. Hopefully, we've gotten more out of it. But if that's the one thing there, then I'll take some solace in that. I think it's one of the most important things in any aspect of life, really. Then leadership in the workforce. So let's say we achieve a leadership position, then what do we do? Or how do we get to a leadership position once we get a job? Being proactive. All master students, that has a baked-in level of being proactive, shows that you want to continue to learn more and be that lifelong learner. A good way, especially when you first start off, is listen more than you speak. You're the new person. Now, even if you're hired into a little bit of an advanced position with experience and everything else, sit back a little bit, learn the organization, learn the people that you're going to lead or that you're going to be interacting with. Be sure to communicate and ask questions. Be familiar with the industry trends. Stay up to date on it. That's probably the one of the biggest potholes that runs people's careers amok. Meaning that they just don't stay up on the trends, or at least their career advancement, and then all of a sudden they're overtaken by somebody who is, or they just lose track of things. So again, just keep track of it. Read Sport Business Journal, keep following tabs on LinkedIn or Twitter or wherever it is. Just have those resources. It doesn't necessarily have to be, okay, I got to wake up at 5 a.m. and read industry trends for 2 hours every morning. Just make sure we're staying up on things. And if something really piques an interest, or going to conferences and attending association events, things like that we're involved in, that certainly helps. And then have that reputation of being honest, taking responsibility. One thing, that integrity can really come through and help out in any situation, really. All right, and so that's a wrap. Hopefully we've enjoyed the course. I know it's intense and quick hitting, but hopefully we've gotten some information out of there, some ideas, some things that we can apply, as well as a little bit more of a deeper understanding of leadership in sport.